They thought the past was buried forever. They were wrong. A rusted lockbox, a forgotten journal, a name no one dares to speak. For years, an abandoned garage sat on the edge of town, collecting dust and silence. But when Calder Hayes, a struggling single father, walks through its doors, he doesn't just find broken tools and faded memories. He finds a secret that was never meant to be uncovered. At the same time, Serafina Langley, the heir to a powerful family, returns, chasing the ghosts of her grandfather's past. But the deeper they dig, the clearer it becomes. This garage was never just a garage, and the man who built it, he never truly left. Some truths are dangerous, some secrets refuse to stay buried. What would you do if the past came knocking on your door? This bridges into the call to action naturally. Have you ever discovered something about your family that changed everything? Drop a comment below. Do you believe the past always finds a way to resurface? If you love mystery, drama and stories that pull at your heart, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The sun was barely rising over Willow Creek, casting a golden glow over the sleepy town as Calder Hayes parked his rusty old truck in front of what could only be described as a forgotten relic of the past. The garage stood there, its wooden sign, long faded, its windows covered in dust and grime. It looked as broken as Calder felt. He stepped out, stretching his stiff muscles after the long drive from the city. His 8-year-old daughter Eloise stirred in the back seat, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Are we home, Daddy?" she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. Calder forced a smile. Home. He hadn't used that word in a long time. After losing his wife in a tragic accident 2 years ago, every place had felt temporary. Just another stop in a long journey of uncertainty. But this time, things had to be different. "This is it, sweetheart," he said, brushing her blonde curls back. "Our new beginning." He wasn't sure if he was trying to convince her or himself. Calder approached the garage's entrance, pushing against the rusted metal doors. They groaned in protest, but eventually gave way, revealing an interior filled with dust, discarded tools, and remnants of a time long gone. Sunlight streamed in through the cracks in the wooden roof, illuminating the thick layer of neglect that coated every surface. His fingers traced the edge of a worn-out workbench, his mind flashing back to the years he'd spent under the hood of cars, his hands stained with grease, his heart full of purpose, before everything fell apart. This garage had been his last option, a cheap foreclosure property, abandoned for over a decade. He had spent the last of his savings on it, gambling on the hope that he could turn it into a working auto repair shop before his money ran out completely. If he failed here, there wouldn't be another chance. He could feel the weight of the gamble pressing down on his shoulders. "You think it can be fixed?" Eloise's small voice broke through his thoughts. Calder turned to her, seeing the uncertainty in her big blue eyes. "Yeah, baby," he said, forcing confidence into his voice. "We'll fix it, together." As Calder surveyed the garage, mentally listing what needed immediate attention, a black sedan pulled up outside. The kind of car that didn't belong in a town like Willow Creek. A man stepped out, Wes Dempsey, the local bank officer. Calder had met him once before over the phone when he finalized the purchase. And now, standing before him, Dempsey looked every bit as skeptical as he had sounded. "I see you finally made it," Wes said, adjusting the cuffs of his pristine suit. His sharp eyes scanned the garage with thinly veiled disapproval. Calder wiped his hands on his jeans, suppressing the urge to roll his eyes. "Yeah, just getting started." Wes nodded slowly, glancing around. "You know, this place has a history. The previous owner, Marshall Langley, used to run it back in the day. It was a staple of the community. People trusted him. Then he vanished. No one ever figured out why. And Calder wasn't sure if the man was trying to warn him or just indulge in town gossip, but he wasn't interested in ghost stories. "I'm not here for history," Calder replied. I'm here to work. Wes smirked. Work requires money, and let me remind you, this property came with a conditional mortgage. You've got 6 months to show progress, or the bank reclaims it. Calder stiffened. He knew the terms. He just didn't need the reminder. Wes took a step closer, his voice dropping slightly. I'll be honest with you, Hayes. No one's managed to make this place work in over a decade. The town's changed. You'd be better off cutting your losses now before you dig yourself into a hole you can't climb out of. Calder clenched his jaw. Thanks for the concern, he said, his voice tight. But I'm not going anywhere. Dempsey chuckled, as if amused by Calder's stubbornness. Suit yourself. With that, he walked back to his car and drove off, leaving a trail of dust in his wake. Eloise tugged at Calder's sleeve. I don't like him, she whispered. Calder let out a breath. Me neither, kiddo. Determined to shake off the encounter, Calder got to work, clearing out debris and organizing tools. As he pulled away an old shelf, something thudded to the floor, a small rusted lockbox. He picked it up, wiping away the dust. The initials ML were engraved on the lid. Marshall Langley. Calder frowned. Could this be something from the former owner? He tried to pry it open, but the lock held firm. Daddy, what's that? Eloise peered over his shoulder. Not sure, Calder admitted, but maybe it'll tell us something about this place. Little did he know, the contents of that box would change everything. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a sleek SUV rolled into town, stopping just outside the old general store. Sarah Langley, stepped out, taking a deep breath of the crisp country air. It had been years since she had set foot in Willow Creek, and yet everything still felt strangely familiar. The streets, the storefronts, the whisper of wind through the old oak trees. It was as if the past had been waiting for her. She wasn't here for nostalgia. She was here to find answers. Her grandfather, Marshall Langley, had disappeared mysteriously over a decade ago, leaving behind only rumors. But recently, a legal notice had surfaced tied to an abandoned garage he once owned. Something about it didn't sit right. Why had he left it behind? And why had the bank suddenly decided to sell it after all these years? She intended to find out. And if the man who had bought the garage stood in her way, well, he'd soon regret it. The morning air in Willow Creek carried the crisp scent of pine and fresh dew as Calder Hayes wiped sweat from his brow. The sun had barely risen, yet he was already knee-deep in clearing out the cluttered garage, determined to make progress. Beside him, Eloise perched on an old wooden stool, her legs swinging as she examined the rusted lockbox they had found the day before. Do you think it has treasure inside? She asked, her blue eyes shining with curiosity. Calder chuckled. I doubt it, kiddo. Probably just some old paperwork. Or before he could finish his sentence, the distinct purr of an expensive engine filled the air. He turned, frowning as a sleek midnight blue SUV pulled up in front of the garage. The vehicle looked wildly out of place against the backdrop of the worn-down shop and the surrounding countryside. The door opened, and out stepped a woman. She was tall, with raven black hair pulled into a sleek ponytail, dressed in tailored jeans, and a fitted leather jacket that screamed big city sophistication. There was a confidence in her posture, a sense of belonging everywhere and nowhere at all. Calder instantly did not like her. She scanned the garage with a sharp, assessing gaze, the way a property investor might size up a failing business. Then her eyes landed on him. You must be the one who bought this place. Her voice was smooth, clipped. East Coast, probably New York. Calder folded his arms. Depends. Who's asking? She took a step forward, the heels of her designer boots clicking softly against the cracked pavement. Serafina Langley. Calder's gut tightened at the name. Langley, the same name etched onto the lockbox Eloise was still holding. I see, he said slowly. Any relation to Marshall Langley? A flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, crossed her face. He was my grandfather, That explained the fancy car. Calder had no patience for people like her. The kind who had never worked a day in their lives, but still thought they had the right to walk in and take what they wanted. "What do you want, Miss Langley?" Serafina's eyes flitted to the lockbox in Eloise's hands. "That," she said. Calder arched a brow. "Funny, I don't remember putting this place up for sale." A slow, practiced smile curled on Serafina's lips. "This garage belonged to my grandfather. He left it behind years ago, and I have reason to believe there are things inside that belong to my family." Calder exhaled through his nose, already hating this conversation. "This garage was abandoned. The bank sold it. I bought it. It's mine now." Serafina tilted her head, studying him. "I understand that, Mr. Hayes, but there may be items of sentimental value here that don't belong to you. I'd simply like to take a look." Calder clenched his jaw. "Let me get this straight. You and your family left this place to rot for more than a decade, and now that someone is finally trying to fix it, you suddenly care." Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes darkened. "That's not what this is about." "Isn't it?" he challenged. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like some rich city girl came back to claim a piece of history she never cared about before." Serafina's cool facade cracked just slightly. Eloise, sensing the tension, squeezed Calder's hand. "Daddy," he sighed, forcing himself to dial down his irritation. Eloise didn't need to witness a full-blown argument on their second day here. Serafina took a deep breath, clearly trying to regain control of the conversation. "I'm not here to take anything from you, Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice softer, but still laced with an edge of steel. "I just want to know if my grandfather left something important behind." Calder hesitated, glancing at the lockbox. He had planned to open it later, maybe even track down someone who had known Marshall Langley. But now, standing in front of his granddaughter, something told him he might not like what he found inside. He exhaled. "Look, Ms. Langley, I don't know what's in that box yet. If it's something that rightfully belongs to you, I won't keep it. But until I know for sure, I'm not handing over anything." Serafina studied him for a long moment. Then, to his surprise, she nodded. "That's fair," she said, her tone begrudgingly respectful. She reached into her leather bag and pulled out a business card, extending it toward him. "If you find anything that seems relevant," she said, "call me." Calder took the card, but didn't promise anything. She lingered for a second longer, as if debating whether to say something else. Then, with a graceful pivot, she turned and strode back to her SUV. Calder watched as she drove away, leaving behind a swirl of dust and unanswered questions. Eloise tugged at his sleeve again. "Daddy, do you think she's telling the truth?" Calder ran a hand through his hair. Did he? He didn't trust Serafina Langley. Not yet. But she had hesitated before leaving, and that hesitation told him there was more to this story than she was letting on. "She might be," he admitted. Eloise glanced at the lockbox, then up at him. "So, are we going to open it?" Calder looked down at the box, the initials M.L. practically staring back at him. Not yet, not until he was ready. He wrapped an arm around Eloise's shoulder and gave her a gentle squeeze. "Come on, kiddo. Let's get to work." For now, the lockbox and the past could wait, but not for long. The old garage smelled of dust, motor oil, and something less tangible. History, the kind of history that clung to the walls, whispered in the cracks of the wooden beams, and lingered in the silence between Calder Hayes and his daughter. Calder sat at the workbench, elbows resting on the scarred wood, staring at the rusted lockbox as if it might open itself. Eloise leaned closer, her small hands tracing the engraved initials. "Daddy, what if it's something really important?" Calder sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Could be. could also be nothing. But deep down, he doubted that. The way Serafina Langley had reacted to the box told him otherwise. She had tried to play it cool, but Calder had spent years reading people. Customers at the garage, loan officers at the bank, cops after his wife's accident. People always gave themselves away. And Serafina Langley, she was hiding something. Still, he wasn't ready to let her or anyone else dictate what happened next. He grabbed a flathead screwdriver, wedged it into the seam of the lockbox and twisted. The metal resisted at first, then gave a quiet pop as the latch broke loose. Eloise sucked in a breath. "Oh, open it, Daddy." Calder lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in a brittle sheet of yellowed newspaper, was a small leather journal. He pulled it out, brushing away dust. The leather was cracked from time and use, the pages fragile. The first thing he noticed was a name scrawled inside the front cover in faded ink. A chill prickled down Calder's spine. He turned the pages carefully. The handwriting was rough but readable. Letters written with a heavy hand, the ink smudged. In places, the first entry dated back more than 20 years ago, August 14th, 1999. I don't know if anyone will ever read this, but I need to put it somewhere. "A man shouldn't take secrets to his grave," Calder frowned. "Secrets," he kept reading. "This garage has been my life, my pride. But I made a mistake. One I can't fix now, one I don't deserve to fix." Calder flipped through more pages, his pulse picking up. There were entries about the town, about customers Marshall had helped, but the words hinted at something deeper. Then he reached an entry that made his stomach tighten. December 2nd, 2003. She came today. Same dark hair, same eyes. She didn't know me, but I knew her. I thought time would dull the guilt, but it only sharpens it. I need to tell the truth before it's too late. Calder exhaled, his fingers tightening on the journal. Who was he talking about? Eloise was still staring at him, wide-eyed. "What does it say?" Calder closed the book gently. "I'm not sure yet, sweetheart." But he knew one thing. Serafina Langley needed to see this. The reluctant messenger. The last thing Calder wanted was to march into town and hand Serafina anything, especially after their tense conversation. But something in his gut told him that whatever was in this journal, she deserved to know. So later that afternoon, he left Eloise at the local diner with Mrs. Callahan, an older woman who had taken a quick liking to his daughter, and drove toward the Langley estate. It was impossible to miss. A grand colonial-style house sat at the edge of town, surrounded by towering oak trees and an iron gate that probably cost more than his entire garage. Calder sighed, tightening his grip on the wheel. Rich people. He pulled up near the entrance, debating whether to knock or just toss the journal over the fence and be done with it. Before he could decide, the front door swung open. Serafina stood there, wearing a crisp white blouse and dark jeans, her sharp gaze locking onto him like she'd been expecting him. "You must really enjoy surprising me," she said. Calder pulled the journal from his pocket. "Found this in the garage. It belonged to your grandfather." For the first time, since meeting her, her expression faltered. She stepped forward, reaching for the book, as if she wasn't sure whether to take it or not. "What's inside?" "You tell me," Calder said. "Looks like he had some regrets. Something about someone he saw years ago." Serafina's fingers curled around the leather cover. She hesitated, then opened the journal, scanning the pages. As her eyes moved across the words, her face changed from curiosity to confusion, then to something heavier. She swallowed hard. This doesn't make sense." "Which part?" She glanced up, something raw in her expression. "My grandfather, he never talked about his past, never. But if he wrote about someone he recognized, someone he felt guilty about, that means..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "I need to read this." Calder studied her for a moment. She wasn't playing games now. This was real. Finally, he nodded. "Let me know what you find." She hesitated. "Wait." He turned back. Serafina took a deep breath, as if struggling with something. Then, finally, she said, "Thank you." Calder raised an eyebrow. "Did that hurt?" She let out a small, reluctant laugh. "A little." For the first time since meeting her, Calder almost smiled. Then, without another word, he walked away, leaving her alone with the ghosts of the past. That night, Calder sat on the front steps of the garage, watching Eloise chase fireflies. The town was quiet, except for the distant hum of crickets and the occasional sound of a car rolling down Main Street. As much as he hated to admit it, he couldn't stop thinking about Serafina, not just because of the journal, but because of the way her mask had slipped, even for a moment. There was more to her than he'd assumed, more to this story than either of them had realized. And somehow, Calder knew, this was just the beginning. The soft hum of the crickets outside the Langley estate was the only sound in the room as Serafina Langley sat at her antique oak desk, the leather-bound journal open before her. A single lamp cast a warm glow over the pages, illuminating the faded ink and trembling handwriting of a man she had known all her life, but perhaps never truly understood. Her grandfather, Marshall Langley, had been a pillar of the town, a respected businessman, a generous benefactor. He had provided jobs, funded scholarships, and even helped struggling families stay afloat. But this journal told a different story. A story filled with guilt, regret, and a truth he had kept buried for decades. Serafina's fingers tightened around the worn pages as she reread the entry Calder had mentioned. She came today. Same dark hair, same eyes. She didn't know me, but I knew her. I thought time would dull the guilt, but it only sharpens it. I need to tell the truth before it's too late. Her pulse quickened. She turned the page, scanning for more answers. But the next entry was ripped out. Only jagged remnants of paper remained, teasing at a secret that had been deliberately erased. Her stomach twisted. Had he meant to destroy it, or had someone else? She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear the knock at first. It wasn't until the second, firmer rap that she blinked, shaking herself out of her daze. Serafina stood and smoothed the creases from her blouse before heading for the door. When she pulled it open, she wasn't surprised to find Calder Hayes, standing on the porch, his broad frame illuminated by the dim glow of the porch light. "What are you doing here?" she asked, crossing her arms. Calder shoved his hands into the pockets of his worn jeans. "I could ask you the same thing about that journal." Serafina sighed, stepping back. "You might as well come in." Calder hesitated, then stepped inside. The contrast between his rough, oil-stained hands and the pristine, polished world of the Langley estate was stark. He scanned the elegant sitting room. Mahogany furniture, marble fireplace, framed paintings that probably cost more than his truck. He didn't belong in a place like this, and he had no intention of staying longer than necessary. Serafina gestured toward the journal on the desk. "I read through most of it. It's unsettling." Calder leaned against the edge of a leather armchair, crossing his arms. "Yeah? Find anything useful?" Serafina exhaled sharply, running a hand through her dark hair. "That depends on what you define as useful. My grandfather clearly had unfinished business, and whoever this woman was, she meant something to him. Or he did something to her," Calder said flatly. She flinched. "You don't know that." "Neither do you." The air between them thickened with unspoken tension. Serafina looked away first. "There was more," she admitted. "Entries that hinted at a deal gone wrong, something that weighed on him for years. But then..." She turned the journal around, pointing at the torn pages. "Someone ripped out the most important part." Calder frowned. "Do you think he did it himself?" She shook her head. "No. My grandfather was meticulous. He kept records of everything. If he had intended to erase something, he would have done